Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of February of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to start with Kherson area. As you can see, there are a lot of icons that shows that during the previous 24 hours there were very heavy artillery duels. The Russian Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost at least two ammo depot in this area. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed two Western artillery systems, one M142 HIMARS system, and another M270 multi-pile launch rocket system. Furthermore, the Russians managed to got two radars in this area, one INT-PQ-37 and another one 35D6. So as you can see, the Ukrainians, they continue accumulation process of vehicles, of special vehicles in this area. I believe that they are planning to do something, or maybe some Russian military experts are saying that the Ukrainians are trying to develop in this area a tactic like to attack the Russians and to bother them all the time, with short, small, sometimes harmless attacks, but the things they want to do is to force the Russians to deploy and to keep some forces in this area, and to force them to move their reserves from the front lines like Donetsk, Bakhmut, or Soledar or Kupiansk in direction of Kherson area. And maybe the Ukrainians are not planning to do anything, but they're trying to keep and to freeze the Russians as much as possible. When talking about Zaporozhye and South Donetsk front line, when talking about the western part of Zaporozhye area, we haven't received any updates from this area. The only thing that the Russians reported that they, using the artillery systems, they attacked the town by the name of Poltavka in Zaporozhye area, and mainly they were trying to get 110th Defense Brigade. When talking about South Donetsk area, as you can see, there are some icons in this area. The Russians completely stopped, and they stopped any storming process of Vuhledar. Maybe they will start everything in the next few days. Maybe they are not planning to do anything. But when talking about the Ukrainians, if you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy their 35th Marine Brigade in the vicinity of Vuhledar just to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to develop the bridgehead in this area. And today the Russian sources, military experts, reported that the Ukrainians also were forced to redeploy some parts of 18th Air Assault Brigade, whose main area of location was in the vicinity of Kremenaya. And this is also a very important update because, as you can see, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy the parts of 18th Brigade. And as we know, as we understand, this brigade was the main power, one of the main powers in this area that Ukrainians were planning to use to storm Kremenaya and to storm to develop offensive operation or counter-offensive operation on the Liman bridgehead. But now these brigades were redeployed, or some parts were spotted in the vicinity of Vuhledar. When talking about Marinka, there are still heavy clashes. Today the Russians published video of clashes in this middle street, on the central street. The Ukrainians were located on the west side of this street. The Russians still control just the south part. They were attacking, and they were showing about destroying and ruins of buildings, and they were saying that they're preparing some kind of streets and line for their stormtroopers to attack in direction of Kurakhova. When talking about Avdiivka area, there are some interesting updates. First of all, the Russians reported that as a result of heavy clashes on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost around 50 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, one Stab B howitzer and another D-30 howitzer. By the way, when talking about South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost around 65 soldiers and 6 armored vehicles. So let's get back to Avdiivka one more time. The Russians continue their pushing in direction of Pervomaiska, and the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported or included in their report some notes about 59th Brigade in this area. The Russians reported that this 59th Motorized Brigade, the Russians reported that they attacked this brigade with artillery system and the one, and they're saying that this brigade had a lot of losses during the previous 24 hours. Furthermore, if you take a look at this map, you're going to see that there is some icon on the east side of Avdiivka, and there is some kind of progress in the vicinity of Avdiivka, to be more precise, in the vicinity of Kamyanka, in this residential area. The Russians reported that they are pushing and they're trying to short the front line, and they're trying to establish control over this residential area like Kamyanka and this residential area in the south of this town, and to block the Ukrainians in Avdiivka on the line between, let's say, Kashtanova and this small lake. So on this line, so they're trying to push and to force the Ukrainians to step back. So we'll see. Maybe that was some kind of requiem combat. I'm not sure, because I don't see any value of attack in this direction. Maybe towns like Kamyanka and this residential area have some value, or they cause some problems for the Russians and so on. So maybe this is the reason they want just to reduce the problems that these two fortifications are able to cause to Russians. Who knows? So for now I don't see any value, but the Russians are pushing in this direction. That means that there is some sense in this. Now we're moving to Bakhmut-Solidar front lines. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. Furthermore, the Russian source map has been updated. As you can see, just the red area and the area between the green line and red area. This is the progress of the Russians. So as you can see, the Russians still haven't established control over this fortification, but the Western sources map shows that the Russians entered this fortification. So as you can see, I believe that in this case we need to believe the Russians, because I haven't heard any reports of taking of these fortifications. As you can see, the Russians marked Saka-Vanseti, this village, as the territory under their control. These days, the Russians are attacking in direction of Vasikovka. Furthermore, today is the first day when the Russians reported about the fact that they managed to enter the town by the name of Mykolaievka. This is not a town, just a small village, just a few dozens of buildings and so on. So I believe that maybe even by the end of this week we're going to receive an update that the Russians established control and started pushing in direction of Razdolovka, Fedorovka, and in direction of Vasikovka. When talking about Krasnaya Gora and Paraskovievka, there are still heavy clashes. Today, the Russians reported that the Ukrainians' 5th Brigade in this area, 5th Battalion, I believe, or something like this, lost more than 70% of their manpower, and they were moved from the Krasnaya Gora and they were replaced by other parts. The Russians are pushes, and if we take a look at deployment map, this one, this is our Bakhmut. This Bakhmut, and this is the front line near Solidar. So as you can see, during the previous weeks, since the beginning of storming operation in Ugledar, the Ukrainians completely refactored their front line in this area. As you can see, they moved a lot of parts, a lot of brigades from Bakhmut to the north in direction of Ugledar, and now the only thing the Ukrainians are trying to do is to slow down and stop the Russians. The thing is that when talking about this place, this area, there are not much fortifications, and when talking about this fortification, this is completely new fortification that were built by the Ukrainians maybe a month ago, or maybe during the process of clashes or storming process of Solidar. So there are not much places where the Ukrainians are able to it's winter, don't forget about this. It's not an easy job to prepare trenches and fortifications. So this is the reason the Ukrainians were forced to deploy a lot of manpower, a lot of forces in this area, a lot of tank brigades, mechanized brigade, a lot of armored brigades, just with one purpose: to slow down the Russians. Furthermore, if you take a look at this map, there is 116th Defense Brigade, there is 113th Defense Brigade, also there is 93rd Mechanized Brigade. So it's completely newly fresh brigades. When talking about 113th, 116th, these completely fresh new brigades that were collected maybe during the previous months, and now they are deployed in the area of Vasikovka. When talking about 93rd, as you can see, the Ukrainians deployed this brigade in the vicinity of Paraskovievka and Krasnaya Gora just to reinforce and the Ukrainians in this area to stop the Russians. So now, when talking about the number of Ukrainian front lines, and when talking about the entire combat line, the area in the vicinity of Blagodatne and Solidar, all these towns like Krasnaya Gora, Paraskovievka, Blagodatne, Solidar, Saka-Vanseti, Nikolaevka, Vasikovka, this is the most important front line on the Ukrainian special military operation. And if the Ukrainians are able to stop the Russians or to slow down them in this area, maybe they will be able to hold for a little bit longer and to get the Western until the receiving of Western weapons. If the Russians are able to penetrate and to establish control, let's say, over Vasikovka, over Razdolovka, or over Paraskovivka and Krasnaya Gora, the entire front line will be collapsed automatically, and the Ukrainians will be forced to step back. Furthermore, when talking about this front line, the Ukrainians are now these days they start preparation of another front line in the vicinity of Chasiv Yar, so behind Bakhmut. And today the Russian sources published a lot of videos and photos of Western sources, and Ukrainian as well, published a lot of videos and photos of fortifications that located between Chasiv Yar and Bakhmut. Furthermore, if you take a look at deployment map, you see that a lot of forces were already moved from Bakhmut, let's say, to the north, to Chasiv Yar and so on. So very slowly, step by step, but the Ukrainians, they're making some changes on the front lines, and I believe that sooner or later they will be forced to take this difficult decision and to step back from Bakhmut. Furthermore, if you take a look at Bakhmut itself, you're gonna see that the Russians have significant progress. They control the entire east part, they control most of the northeast part, they are pushing from the south, so the area that located between this river Bakhmutka, this one, and this Red Cloud will be taken by the Russians maybe within the next week or maybe two. The only territory that will be remains under Ukrainian control is the central part and the east part of Bakhmut, and I'm not sure that they are planning to hold this area for a very long time. Everything depends on the area in the vicinity of like in Krasnaya Gora and Paraskovivka. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman frontline, the Russians have activated in this area, and the thing is that, as we discussed, during the storm process of Ugledar, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy these AT's air assault brigades. So that's why the Ukrainians now they have a weaker position, they have less power, less manpower in this area, and the Russians from their side activated their movements. As you can see, there are a lot of icons on this area from Kremenная, Krasnoyarechskaya, and the most important Nevskaya and Yampolovka. So the Russians are trying to attack and to split the Ukrainian army in this area in two parts. If you take a look at this map, you're going to see that this map is not updated. Deployment map, let's say, and as you can see, according to deployment map, the front line from Zhirelnaya to Novovodyanaya goes along the river, Zherebets River. The same picture we can see on the Russian sources map. This is Zhirelnaya, this is the river, and the front line goes to Novovodyanaya. And if you take a look at Western source map, you're going to see that this area is considered under Ukrainian control, or maybe is in the gray zone. So first of all, let's update this map just to understand the situation on this front line. Kalamychikha, Zhirelnaya is under Russian control. So this area is under Russians, and Novovodyanaya, then Plashanka. We are going to Chervonopopovka, then we are moving to the west to Yampolovka, the forest, Dibrova. And this is the territory that, according to the Russian source map and according to deployment map, is under Russian control. So all these small towns along the river and so on. And now you can see, now you can better understand the situation in the vicinity of Liman. So as you can see, there is a back, there is a Russian back when talking about the Ukrainian side, and there is a Ukrainian back. And these days, the Russians want, and they started their offensive operation movements in this direction, from the south, from Dibrova in direction of Yampolovka, Tsernay, and of course the Russians tried to develop their offensive operation from Makeevka in direction of Makeevka, Nevskaya, and Plashanovka, Nevskaya as well. So the Russians activated in this area. When talking about Liman, the Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost around 100 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-30. So Liman remains the second front line when talking about the losses, about the activity on this special military operation. The first place, of course, is Bakhmut, and the second place always Liman. And as you can see, if you remember, remind you one more time, yesterday the Russians reported that they established control over Sakha-Ivantsety, over this town, and today the Russians reported, at least it was the first report, that they entered Nikolaevka. So, when talking about this front line, the Russians these days increase the pressure in direction of Vasikovka, in direction of Razdolovka from many sides. The Russians, as usually, try to attack Veselaya and so on. And I believe that all these towns will be taken by the Russians within the next weeks, or week, or maybe two, or something like this. And we are going to see the front line something like this. And furthermore, I'm talking about Vasikovka. So, and we can understand this because, as you can see, the Russians have increased the pressure on the north from Seversk, and also the Russians increased the pressure on the south. And as you can see, during the next 2 weeks, the Russians are able to create at least 2 cauldrons in this area. The first one, cauldron, is Bakhmut cauldron. To do this, the Russians are doing this right now. They need to establish control over the south part, over the southeast part of Bakhmut, to take control over Ivanovska, and by taking this area, they will cut the Ukrainians in Bakhmut from the south, from the east, and so on. Furthermore, there are very heavy clashes in Krasnaya Gora and Paraskoviivka. We just discussed about the number of Ukrainian forces that were deployed in this area just with one purpose, to slow down the Russians. But I believe that the Russians, this is their plan. This is not Ugledar, this is Wagner's, and I believe that they will take these towns sooner or later. And this is going to be the first cauldron. When talking about the north part, the Russians are storming Vasikovka, and we understand that the thing that the Russians want to do is to get Privilya, this town. As you can see, there is a rivers. There is a river on the north near Bandarnaya, this Vasikovka. This is the first river. It's like Vasikovka river, this one. And when talking about the west side, there is a canal, there is a M03 road, and there is a small river on the north. So we need to understand that the main goal for the Russians is to get as fast as possible to Privilya, because by taking Privilya, the Russians will be able to establish very powerful fortification and very, like, some kind of stable bridgehead for some time, for regrouping, for replacement, to stop or to fight against the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation. So Privilya is the main target, is the main goal of the Russians, to get here. And by taking Privilya, by taking this bridgehead, by reaching this canal that located on the west from Privilya, the Russians will be able to close the head and the neck of this battle, Bakhmut battle. And this is going to be the first cauldron. And I believe that by this attack, the Russians will be able to encircle a big number of Ukrainians. I'm not talking about few, or 3,000 or 5,000. I'm talking about maybe 10 or 50 or maybe 20,000 of Ukrainians that can be encircled in this area. As you can see, if the Russians moves further to Privilya, they will be able to encircle and to create or to block Seversk from the south. And furthermore, this is the reason the Russians need to activate their movements on the north these days, because if they to encircle Seversk, the only possible solution for this, they need to take control and establish control over Yampol, this one. But to take Yampol first, they need to take control over these towns like Nevskaya, Novosadova, Terny, Yampolovka, Zarechina. They need to clear this area. I'm not talking about these forests. I believe that maybe this is not a very good idea these days, try to enter this forest. This completely mined. There are a lot of Ukrainian soldiers. I believe that the Russians need to block, to establish some kind of fortification on the line, on the forest border and so on, and to try to get Zarechina, Yampol. So if the Russians are able to get Yampol and to establish their artillery system there, to make some fortifications, to establish bridgehead, we can say about another encirclement of Seversk. So within the next month or two, the Russians are able to encircle Bakhmut, to encircle Seversk, and we are talking about maybe 30, 40, 50,000 of Ukrainians. I believe that Ukrainians at some point of this operation will do in order to start the evacuation process. But today the Russians reported that they establish real fire control over the only road that Ukrainians have to safe road. It's like a live road or something like this. And now it's not very good idea to use this road. So the situation is very complicated. And of course, the Russians, they have plans, but they're not pushing in direction of Seversk. They're trying to do everything carefully. They are like hunting the Ukrainians. They don't want to scare the Ukrainians and to force them to step back. They want to prepare everything, and I believe that at some certain point of time they will attack and they will try to encircle these two groups. Furthermore, don't forget about possible attack from Belgorod in direction of Izum. And this is possibly third cauldron that maybe the Russians have as a plans, but I'm not sure if they are able to complete this encirclement or something like this. The distance is too long, and it might be very difficult for the Russians. But anyway, at least they are able to push the Ukrainians from this bridgehead. So everything is very interesting. Furthermore, don't forget that today, the 2nd of February, like in 3 weeks, we are going to see some kind of, I don't know, the first year of special military operation, and most of the Western countries, most of the Western experts and Ukrainian experts are saying that by this date, the Russians will try to do something. And of course, from the other side, we see that the Ukrainians are promised to get Western weapon. So there is a short window for the Russians to do something. And I believe that they will concentrate it on this front line, and they will try to collapse Seversk and Bakhmut. And don't forget another important thing, that if the Russians are able to do everything smart, very careful, they will be able to collapse a very long front line. If the Russians are able to encircle Bakhmut, to collapse Seversk, to collapse Liman, Yampol, so that means that they will be able to collapse the front line around like 70 kilometers. This line will be collapsed. 70 kilometers of big hole in Ukrainian front line. This is very dangerous because this big hole will be completely fulfilled with the Russians' armored vehicles and manpower. And at some point of time, if the Ukrainians are not going to do everything smart, they can start running, and at some points of this front line, the Russians will be able even to run faster than the Ukrainians are running from the front line. So it's very difficult to understand maybe, but the situation is critical. The Ukrainians, when talking about them, they need to start preparation of front lines along Seversky Donetsk River around Slaviansk. And of course, the most important thing, they need to start preparation of their fortification around Nikolaev and Kramatorsk. And the Russian sources and the Ukrainian sources as well are saying that the front line between Slaviansk, the defense line of Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Druskovka, Konstantinovka is not ready. The Ukrainians haven't prepared because of all those corruptions, or because of all those things, manipulation with finance and money. And as you know, I believe you know that there are a lot of rumors, a lot of cases in Ukraine with the Ministry of Defense, with military companies who have some contracts with the Ministry of Defense. And there's billions of local currency, of dollars, and in local currency as well. So everybody understands that all those money that were sent to prepare the defense line, they were just corrupted and robbed by the Ukrainians. And maybe not just by the Ukrainians as well. So, and the thing is that a lot of money that were sent to prepare Ukrainians' defense line from Slaviansk to Konstantinovka just disappeared. And now everybody understands this. And the thing is that nobody have time to prepare this line from scratch. So we'll see what is going to be next, and I believe that when talking about the Ukrainians, nothing good is going to be next for them, at least on the Seversk and Bakhmut front line. Maybe not, maybe they are able to hold the Russians and to wait the Western weapon, and after that they will be able to stop and slow down the Russians. We'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you can condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.